The sunlight that streamed through the towering leaded windows of Buckingham Palace's Grand Hall on Princess Charlotte's 11th birthday was a deceptive kind of light. It was the sort of glow that made everything look ceremonial and serene, even when the foundations of the House of Windsor were about to be shaken to the core. The flowers, white lilies and gardenias, were arranged with surgical precision, their scent heavy and cloying in the stagnant air. The seating plan had been drafted by a courtier who understood exactly which family members needed at least 40 feet of buffer zone between them to maintain the peace. Everything in the room communicated that the institution was in control, that the variables had been accounted for, and that the day would proceed as a harmless, gilded celebration of a child's birth. However, the palace planners had made one fatal miscalculation. They did not account for Princess Anne. She walked into the hall wearing a dark armor-like suit, her hair pulled into a signature high bun, so tight it seemed to defy gravity. She carried the expression of a woman who had already decided on a course of action and was simply waiting for the clock to strike the appropriate hour. She did not make a fuss. She navigated the room with a clinical efficiency, finding her position at the front as the ambient noise of 300 guests dropped into a heavy, expectant silence. Beside her stood Charlotte, 11 years old, dressed in white, possessing her grandmother's piercing blue eyes and a child's quiet uncertainty about why the adults in the room were looking at her as if she were a monument rather than a birthday girl. Anne began to speak, her voice lacking volume, but possessing the kind of authority that makes glass seem fragile. She announced that she was formally bestowing upon Princess Charlotte a special honorary title, the Diana Recognition. It was not a title of protocol or rank, but of spirit. She looked directly at the child and declared that Charlotte was the true inheritor of the values Diana had lived, by compassion, courage, and an absolute refusal to remain comfortable while others suffered. Then, with a deliberate, slow-motion grace, Anne opened an old red velvet box. The tiara inside caught the sunlight and fractured it into 1,000 sharp pieces that danced across the faces of the royal family. It was the Spencer tiara, the very one Diana had worn on her wedding day. The room did not just fall silence. It froze in a state of cryogenic shock. The applause was scattered and thin-buried under a tidal wave of whispered disbelief that moved through the crowd like wind through dead grass. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, gripped William's hand with a force that turned her knuckles into white stones. King Charles sat motionless, his expression a carefully maintained mask of exhaustion that refused to reveal whether he felt pride or panic. But it was Queen Camilla who shattered the decorum. She was on her feet before the applause could even form the legs of her chair, letting out a sharp, dry scream against the marble floor. Her face was a color that had nothing to do with emotion, and everything to do with the physical manifestation of pure, unadulterated fury. Camilla did not whisper. She did not care about the guests, the foreign dignitaries, or the cameras that were undoubtedly capturing every micro-expression. Her voice was high and cutting as she declared the act completely unacceptable. She argued that Anne had no right to make such a decision independently, that the tiara did not belong to Charlotte's generation, and that the protocols of the jewelry archive had been bypassed. Then she said the words that had been simmering beneath the surface for 20 years. Diana is gone. We need to look toward the future, rather than keep digging up the painful past. The grand hall went cold. Anne did not flinch. She simply looked at Camilla with the terrifying steadiness of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this confrontation for 6 months and was watching it arrive precisely as predicted. At the corner of Anne's mouth was a microscopic smile, the smile of a predator watching the trap snap shut. What the public saw that day was a bold act of defiance. What they did not see were the 6 months of deep-cover investigative work Anne had performed in suburban cafes, drizzly parking lots, and a basement safe in Surrey. This was not a spontaneous gift. It was the final move in a high-stakes chess game. Anne's journey had begun when she noticed systematic gaps in the royal archives. While researching family history, she found that files which had existed in 1998, 2005 and 2012 were simply gone. There were no transfer records or archival notes, just empty slots where history used to be. The missing items were not administrative. They were Diana's personal letters to her sons, photographs from her landmine walks, and diaries from the AIDS wards. Someone was methodically erasing the human substance of Diana, transforming her from a global symbol of compassion into a sterile, unhappy historical footnote. Anne had tracked down a former butler named Robert, a man in his late 70s who carried the posture of someone who had been holding a heavy secret for 30 years and was finally too tired to keep it. In a quiet house on the outskirts of London, Robert told her what he had seen organized nighttime removals of Diana's personal effects beginning in 1996 and accelerating after 1997. Staff members who were loyal to Diana had been quietly reassigned or encouraged to resign with generous, non-disclosure-laden packages. They were told that their reputations, their pensions, and the peace of their families depended on their silence. Robert's conscience had finally outlasted his caution. He told Anne that the erasure was a deliberate attempt to manage Diana out of the family's narrative so that a new queen could occupy the space without the shadow of a comparison. But Anne needed more than the word of a butler. She needed the kind of evidence that could not be dismissed as the paranoia of a grieving family. She found it in Surrey in the home of Edward Langford, a retired archive assistant who had spent 20 years waiting for a moment when bringing the truth forward wouldn't result in his own destruction. In a moisture-proof safe in his basement, Langford had kept photocopied retrieval records, dated minutes of internal decisions, and a small silver USB drive. When Anne played that drive on her laptop, the room turned cold. It was a recording from 2005, the year of Charles and Camilla's wedding. The voice was unmistakable, cold certain, and giving a direct order: dispose of everything, letters, photographs, mementos, leave nothing that could remind the public of her. This is an order. It was Camilla's voice. Anne had spent months building a dossier that removed all ambiguity. She had the lists, the dates, and the voice of the architect herself. When Charles finally convened an internal meeting 3 weeks after Charlotte's birthday, the doors were locked and no aids were permitted. The room, known as the room with no exit, was thick with the scent of old wood and the unspoken weight of a 1,000-year-old dynasty. Anne placed the folder on the table and played the recording. The reaction on Camilla's face was the shattering of her 20-year facade. She tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, a way of protecting the family's privacy during a transitional period. But Anne produced document after document that closed every exit. The contingency plan Camilla had prepared, blaming a deceased secretary, simply collapsed under the information density of Anne's evidence. Charles listened in a silence that looked like a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He had spent decades trying to keep the peace between his past and his present, only to realize that his present had been systematically murdering his past. He told Camilla she had gone too far. The decision was made internally to protect the institution from a full-blown public scandal, but the private consequences were surgical and permanent. Camilla was moved to the eastern wing of the palace. Her official participation in royal duties was suspended indefinitely. The woman who had tried to erase Diana's memory from history was now, by the weight of her own actions, removed from the active life of the family. The center of power had shifted, and it had shifted toward the woman who stood as the guardian of the truth. But the real objective was never revenge. It was stewardship. As Anne stood by the grand hall window, after the confrontation, she felt the complicated relief of a task completed. She had asked people to take risks, to carry heavy truths for decades. and she had finally honored that trust. She told William that Diana deserved to be in the light, not managed into a cautionary chapter of a textbook. Charlotte was now the guardian of that light. At 11 years old, she carried a tiara that was more than just diamonds and platinum. It was a permission to know the truth. She inherited the grandmother's eyes, but now she also inherited her unedited story. The landmine fields, the AIDS wards, and the proximity to suffering that the institution had once found so inconvenient. The Spencer tiara now sits in a box that belongs to Charlotte, a reminder that some legacies are carried by the people, not the palaces. Diana's memory survived because it lived in the hearts of the public, and Anne had ensured it would now live protected and authenticated in the heart of the next generation. The rewrite of history had failed. You cannot rewrite the future while the past still commands the room. And on that May afternoon, the past spoke through a red velvet box and a little girl's inherited eyes. The golden illusion of a sanitized history had been incinerated, and in its place was a factual base that the monarchy would have to learn to live with. Why did the erasure attempt fail so spectacularly? Because memories are stubborn things, and some spirits are too large to be contained by an archival box or a corporate strategy. Every attempt to silence Diana only made her voice louder in the public imagination. Books, documentaries, and the fascination of younger generations proved that a legacy of compassion is more durable than any crown or any palace directive. Anne recognized this, and she realized that the monarchy's survival depended on embracing Diana's humanity rather than hiding it. The cost to the family's unity was high, but the price of silence would have been the eventual death of the institution's soul. The root wound of the family, the trauma of the 1990s, had to be faced before the future could be secured. The palace has returned to its quiet ceremonial order, but the atmosphere has changed forever. There is a new clarity in the corridors. The Diana Recognition title is a permanent part of Charlotte's identity, a signal to the world that the values of the people's princess are not buried, but are being actively cultivated for the future throne. Anne's 6 months of quiet work proved that the only way forward is through the truth, no matter how buried it might be. The shattering was necessary. The flame has been passed, the archive has been restored, and the rest of the story is Charlotte's to write. She is no longer just a princess of the blood. She is the steward of a legacy that belongs to the world. The paradox of the House of Windsor is that it is a system built on secrets, yet it is currently being saved by the revelation of those very secrets. Charles, facing the twilight angle of his own reign, had to decide between the woman he loved and the truth of the woman he had lost. In the end, he chose the crown. He chose the joint continuity of William and Catherine, and he chose the unedited history for Charlotte. The aftertaste of the birthday party was one of somber victory. The institution had survived, but it had done so by admitting its own failures. Anne had acted as the philosophical punchline to 20 years of deception, proving that even in a world of protocol, a single person with a folder of facts can change the course of a dynasty. As the years pass, Charlotte will grow into the understanding of what the red velvet box truly contained. She will learn that the tiara was the least important part of the gift. The real gift was the information density of her grandmother's life, the proof that you can be royal and still be human, that you can be part of a firm and still have a conscience. She will look at the recordings, she will read the letters that were almost lost, and she will decide for herself how to carry that weight. The commercial cinematic reality of her life is that she is now the most important bridge between the past and the future. She is the living checklist of everything Diana hoped for and everything the palace feared. The final image of the birthday celebration is not the cake or the guests, but of Anne bending down to whisper to Charlotte. She didn't tell her to be a queen. She told her to be brave. She told her that her grandmother would have been proud of her, not for the white dress or the tiara, but for the way she stood her ground in a room full of adults who were afraid of the truth. That is the resolution of this chapter. The root wound is being healed not through erasure, but through exposure. The House of Windsor has a new backbone, and it is made of the memories that were once meant to be destroyed. If you found this journey through the archives and the heart of the palace compelling, subscribe to our channel. We continue to peel back the velvet curtains on the lives that defined an era, the lives that were lived in the brightest lights and the darkest shadows. What do you think of Princess Anne's move? Was it a necessary restoration of history or a betrayal of the current queen? Does a child have the right to know the unedited history of her family, regardless of the cost to the monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The stories of the sovereigns and the stars never truly end. They just wait for the next red velvet box to be opened. Keep looking for the truth behind the glamour, for that is where the real story lives. The cinematic journey of the monarchy continues, and we will be here to witness every shattering moment. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay honest, and remember that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to find the key. The lights of the grand hall have faded, the lilies have been cleared away, and the eastern wing remains silent. But the Spencer tiara still catches the light in a secure vault, waiting for the day Princess Charlotte steps into her own power. The archive is no longer missing its heart. The man in the charcoal suit has been bypassed, and the egg test of royal loyalty has been failed by the person no one expected. History has been standardized. The fluff has been removed, and the truth stands solitary, silent, and supreme. The story of the birthday that changed everything is now part of the record, a cinematic document of a family that finally decided to be real. And as the sun sets over Windsor, the echo of Anne's authority remains a reminder that in the niche of kings and queens, the only thing more powerful than a crown is the truth. Goodbye for now, but the conversation is just beginning. The future is finally painfully and beautifully honest. Keep watching, keep searching. The reality is far more interesting than the legend. And the legend of the Spencer tiara has only just begun its second act.